I remember the moment when I realized that CoPastoring had made a difference in the life of our church. It was about a year ago, and my co-pastor and I had been approached by people in the community with a request to host a tent encampment in the parking lot of our church, about 40 people experiencing homelessness. The question did not surprise us at all, because like many churches in Seattle, our church had hosted encampments like this several times before under the leadership of previous pastors. And like many churches in Seattle and in places where you live, our church had faced consequences for that decision. Leaders had left. The neighbor lady, who's a lawyer, had threatened to sue. But every time, when faced with this decision, our church had chosen to host the encampment. And so we really didn't think it would be a big deal. When my co-pastor and I presented this request to the church council, and we looked at them and said, so you know the risks, you know the needs of the people, should we host this encampment or not? What do you think? And the church council stared at us, and they said, we don't make decisions like this. You're the pastors. You're the ones who are supposed to decide. And we stared at the church council, and we said to them, for months, you've been watching the two of us, your pastors, make decisions together, and now it's time for you to do the same thing with each other as leaders of this church. And the church council looked really, really scared. And that was the moment that convinced me that co-pastoring could really make a difference. You see, in the room where our church council meets is a giant poster-sized photo of the pastor who had saved the church. The one who was a strong leader, the pastor who is so beloved that we named a whole room of the church after this pastor. This pastor made some interesting leadership choices during his tenure at our church. For example, if this pastor thought that someone's name was too difficult to pronounce, he changed their name to something easier. When this pastor called someone to schedule a pastoral visit, he not only told the person what time he would be arriving, but what food and drink he expected them to prepare for him when he walked in the door. This pastor used to stand in the church parking lot and pick up every blade of grass, every weed, every dried leaf until the asphalt looked perfect and pristine and flawless. If this pastor said jump, all our church ever had to do was to ask him how high. For years, this had been the culture of the church, and now our church had two pastors, and neither one of us was willing to tell them what to do. So after lots of grumbling and a couple of hours of reflection, the church council did decide that for the 6th time, they would host the tent encampment in our parking lot. And it went great. People joined the church because of this decision. The parking lot wasn't immaculate anymore. But finally, it had started to bear some fruit. It was, in fact, next to a different church parking lot where I first met my co-pastor. The district superintendent had called us both to meet at my co-pastor's church at the time. Co-pastor was kneeling down in the mud planting petunias. He had found them half price at Home Depot at the plant sale, and he thought they would just look so beautiful that he couldn't pass up the opportunity to make his church look that much more inviting. So I walked past this man kneeling into the mud, into the church. The three of us gathered, co-pastor, me, and the district superintendent. The DS said, there's a small church I think it matches your gifts. It needs a little bit of tender, loving care. And I'm wondering if the two of you would consider going there as a co-pastorate, as a pastoral team. The district superintendent continued, this would just be for a year. After that, you can move on to bigger and better and higher paying things. And the way I think it will work, he said, is he will do all of the administrative stuff, and you, Meredith, can do all of the pastoral stuff. And then he left us alone to talk it out. So we talked and we got to know each other a bit, and we agreed that we thought we'd be a pretty good team, but we also agreed that the district superintendent's plan was a little bit silly. Neither one of us could imagine, in the life of a small church, separating caring from people from ordering the life of the church. The parts of ministry are too tangled up together to do that. And we certainly could not imagine a structure in the year 2019, 2020, where the male pastor dealt with property and money, and the female pastor dealt with feelings and families. So we approached our new job with curiosity about this church and respect for each other, and also a sense that taking on roles that were outdated and sexist would not be the most faithful choice we could make. So we accepted this proposal of the co-pastorate, but when it came to discerning what our roles were going to be in this job, we told the district superintendent we would be making our own way through the bramble. So at the beginning of our co-pastorate, we went to everything, every meeting, every house blessing, every social event, every neighborhood association, election. It's the kind of thing Jesus did. He showed up, and he ate and drank with all kinds of people. He left, he listened, he asked questions, he paid attention to who drew closer to him and who seemed to pull away. So that's what we did. We followed Jesus and we showed up, my co-pastor and I, and we figured that after a few months, it would become clear as we developed relationships, which relationships would be my responsibility and which would be his. And once we figured that out, we thought we would know how to divide up the work of ministry. Months went by. The division of labor was not clear, but the power of being together was. When the two of us led communion together, people said, I did not realize how powerful it would be to see a man and a woman standing behind that table. When we met with church leaders, they listened differently when they realized that my co-pastor and I did not agree on everything and somehow moved the ministry forward faithfully. We were happy. The church was happy, but people were confused. They asked questions. Which one of you is the boss? Which one of you is the senior pastor? And which one of you is the associate? We were troubled. I was troubled by this question. What would happen to the church if there wasn't one clear leader with one clear direction, a clear division of labor, like some kind of assembly line where everybody does their part and disciples of Jesus Christ pop out on the other end of the conveyor belt, ready to transform the world? What would happen without that conveyor belt? This question troubled me for a long time, longer than it should have. And then I remembered something. I wasn't called to be a worker on an assembly line. I was called to be a pastor. And the biggest thing, the biggest gift that pastors have to offer to the world is who we are as people, as followers of Jesus, as wonderfully made human beings whose actions and whose words are always communicating something about God. When that pastor in that giant photo on the wall was changing people's names and inviting them over to his house, inviting himself over to their house at 5 o'clock in the morning, he was communicating something about God. He was living out a theology in which if someone wants to serve God, if someone wants to serve the church, the first thing they have to do is to accommodate the needs of the people in power. Everything we said and everything we did as co-pastors helped us to say something different about God. When my co-pastor and I took turns preaching the word, we were saying something about God. When we went to meetings and encouraged people to discern for themselves what the community was called to do and be, we were saying something about God. When we moved from table to table to table at the church potluck, sitting at the table that spoke English and the table that spoke Tagalog and the table that spoke Ilocano, we were saying something about God. When we stopped and talked to the guy who ran the marijuana shop down the hill and watched him listen to both of us describe what the church was doing in the neighborhood, we were saying something about God. Ministry is theology. And the way we structure our ministry reveals what we believe about God's heart and God's relationships, and whether God is standing with us or standing above us, always looking down. Co-pastoring modeled for our church what leading with another person could look like, and it was really annoying. And it was really slow, and it made me really grouchy, and there were times when I thought, I wish that this man would just let me do what I know how to do because he has no idea what he's doing. And I am sure he thought the same thing about me. But slowly but surely, in our little multi-ethnic church on the edge of Seattle, people started thinking to themselves, I'm a leader. I am a leader, and so is that person over there who looks so different from me. And what would it look like if we stopped following behind each other and started walking with each other side by side? That giant photo of the pastor is not the only art we have in our church. In the church office, there's this beautiful textile from Peru that shows the people crossing the Red Sea. And if you look very closely, in the middle of the sea, standing on a rock, is this man in a long robe. And for the longest time, I thought that guy must be Moses. But then when I looked more closely at the textile, I found Moses. He was at the front of the line of people crossing the Red Sea, standing next to Miriam, leading the people out of bondage. The person standing alone on the rock wasn't Moses. It was Pharaoh. And Pharaoh was never meant to be the hero of our story. Sometimes the United Methodist Church to me just seems to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and vote and talk some more. And I hope and I pray that as we move into whatever that promised land is going to be, that we leave some of those long, cumbersome ways of making decisions behind. They're not serving us well. But I also hope that as we move into the promised land, we leave Pharaoh behind too. We leave behind this idea that dwells in our hearts without us really realizing it sometimes, that there must be one single authoritative leader who will make all of the decisions so that finally we don't have to. Whatever our new leadership is going to be, I want it to embody relationship. I want it to be as effective as possible in communicating the kingdom of God and what that can look like here on earth. And if our new leadership is messy and it's not at all efficient, but it's effective in doing that, I'm willing to make the trade. My co-pastor still likes gardening, but he doesn't plant petunias anymore. Mostly what he does is he tends the mountain blackberries that border our church. I don't know if you've seen these in your time in Seattle, but it's an invasive species. It's kudzu for the Pacific Northwest. Blackberries are thorny, and they're fast growing, and they're so invasive that every year they threaten to overtake the fence that separates our parking lot from the neighbor's yard. And these particular blackberries are more than one pastor could handle. They're more than two pastors could handle. They're more than two pastors and an entire board of trustees could handle. And so rather than set ourselves up for failure, we did what every good Northwesterner would do. We went out and bought several dozen donuts, and we had a party. And 17 different people showed up to help us cut the blackberries. There was a man who used to be a rice farmer in the Philippines who was really good at knowing how to reshape the land. There's an African American man who was a veteran who wasn't afraid of walking into the places in that bramble that we knew were probably going to hurt. We never divided up the work because that's not what you do at a party. And we certainly did not have pastors standing in the parking lot picking up every dried leaf and thorn, making sure things were pristine. But working side by side, we cleared enough space in our big blackberry bramble that the church and the neighbor lady and the people who lived in tents in the parking lot had enough room to move around. And along the way, when we were working, we picked 7 buckets of juicy, ripe blackberries. And it was really inefficient. And it was really messy. And some of us got scratched by the thorns. It hurt. But there in our messy little parking lot garden, side by side, we discovered that sharing the work wasn't efficient, but it sure was effective. And the fruit that we harvested tasted just a little bit more sweet. Thank you.